I'm going to show you two very basic patching styles. So this is plain weave. Plain weave is where every other thread goes up and down. It is the most basic weave structure. You could do it all in one color, which would be the most basic patch, or you can do stripes. And I have stripes in the warp, which is what we will have connected to the hooks on our loom. And the weft also has stripes here, which is what we weave back and forth as we are creating our patch. And how you attach stripes or one solid yarn to the loom can be a little different. So I'll show you that in just a minute. I'm going to be working on a thrift store sweater, so the stakes are low. It's not something precious that I have to worry about creating a darn that I'm not happy with. And also, there isn't a hole here, which having intact fabric so that you're not fighting tension on the fabric that's changing around a hole is a nice way to get started. So you can definitely jump into mending all kinds of giant holes as you get started. But your first darn or two, I would suggest doing it on an intact fabric. I am using a loom from Alex Vare. This is made in Ukraine, and there are hooks that I can change just by moving this along the top. The hooks go back and forth and create the shed. And so that's where one thread is up and one thread is down, up, down, for plain weave. And then you can also adapt that for more complicated weave structures. I'm using a tapestry needle, which means it has a dull point. And that's because I'm working on a knitted fabric. So that will help me grab a stitch or two, but not pierce the stitch. And if I was working on denim or a woven fabric, I might need a sharp tip needle, like a darning needle. The main thing is that it is longer than my patch so that I can easily pass it back and forth as I weave. So you need that, some yarns, and some sharp needles, and you're ready to get started. I have another thrift store sweater. This was a really nice cashmere sweater that was a terrible color and had a stain. So I dipped it in indigo, and now it needs a little more personality. So I'm going to add some patches to it. I'm going to put the darning disc underneath the fabric, and I'm going to put on the first of two rubber bands. I want to make sure that this fabric is taut, but it is not puckered. If this was puckered, my patch would be too big. So I want my patch to lay flat. So I don't want this fabric to be pulling in either direction, any direction. Then I put in the top of the mending loom. Let me get my rubber band here. All right. It's going to go on like this. All right. And I want to make sure that my hooks are in line with my knitted fabric because I do want a square patch in this case. Thread my needle. All right. I'm going to enter the fabric well below where I want my patch to be, and I'm going to make a fairly small patch. All right, because I entered the fabric below where I want my patch to be, it means that the tail end of this yarn is out of my work area. I'm going to come up and hook onto hook that most closely aligns with the column of knitted stitches I'm working with. Then when I come back down, I'm going to move over, it looks like probably one full knitted stitch. All right, and I want to try and stay along the same row of knitted stitches. If this was woven fabric, I could leave a guideline at the bottom of this, or I could outline my square in chalk. However that works best for you. And then if you move that hook to the side and separate the next hook from its buddies, that's usually a nice way to make sure that you can more easily get in there. And I want to try and make sure that these are all about the same tension. And then I move over one knitted stitch. And you'll see that there's a little bit of kink to this yarn because I am finger twisting. So from the needle, you can just twist that and add in however much twist you want into your yarn. Twist makes it stronger, but the higher twist that yarn is, the less space it will fill in your darn. And so this darn is not in a high wear area. It's just on the front of the shirt tail. So I don't need this darn to be super strong. My weft yarn is going to enter the scene in the same way. So it's going to insert from beyond my work area and come up the right side where I want my first weft to be. I tend to pick up and lay down my loom a lot as I work. You may choose to do one or the other. That is up to you. So I will first move all of my hooks to the left. And I am going to send the needle through from the eye end because it's bigger and less likely to get caught. So when I move these hooks to the left, it raises the right-hand side of each of those loops and creates a shed. And the shed is where we pass our weft. When I get to the other side, I'm going to insert my needle at the bottom, so where the first pick, which is a pass through the shed, goes, and then I'm going to come up to the right side again, where I want the beginning of the next pick to be. When I move my hooks to the other side, changes the shed, and I can still change the tension on the beginning and end of the warp, which is really nice. And again, I am working through the shed. And when I come through this time, I can beat. So I'm pushing the first one into place, the first pick, as I pull through the second. I kind of like to hold on to the edge, especially when I'm working with a knitted fabric, so it doesn't pucker. So again, we want to try and keep this the same size throughout to create a nice tidy mend. Attach at the edges again. And once again, if you hold this down as you pull through, you're less likely to cause puckering. When I change the shed again and put the eye end of the needle through, create the next pick, I beat that second pick into place. When you get to the top of this type of darn where we have one continuous yarn in the warp and one continuous yarn in the weft, you'll see the main drawback to this very simple technique. And that's that we can't weave all the way to the top of those hooks because we still need to be able to get it off of the loom. So I can't pass this through any further. So I have to bring these hooks so they're somewhat straight and remove it from the loom. And what I'm left with are little loops. And so my last trip across needs to fill in those loops. Okay? That is not always easy because I need to go under here, pull it through, weaving across one more time. So I'm following the alternating up and down over one loop under another. And then when I get to this other side, I'm going to just tack down the top of this. It's like a little pocket at this point, which might be fun as well. And I am so right-handed that I'm going to turn this over in order to finish the job. I just tack this down. And there we are. And I take my rubber bands off of here. Take it off the loom. I have my patch. On the back side, I only see the outline, and I can weave in these ends. The other warping technique I'll show you is where we attach a separate yarn to every hook. So each warp end is disconnected from one another. And I will come under a couple of threads. So I'm starting more in the middle of my darning disc than I did the last time, and I'm leaving a short tail. I'll come up to the hook and then enter and exit right next to the other end. Then I'm going to clip this off. So this warp end and this warp end are two ends of the same loop that attach to one hook. And I'm going to change yarns. I'm going to use different colors, but you could use all the same color or do two of the same color and then switch it up. But you're going to come up and around the hook that's closest. What this does is allows me to manage the tension on all of these warp ends as I work. So you would go ahead and warp all the rest of these and weave your patch in the same way as we did before. And then I'll show you the best part about this technique when you get to the end. This patch is created just like we started this one. So each warp end is separate. I've woven the weft like we did in the very first patch, where we go under a little bit of fabric and come through the shed and into a little bit of fabric. And when we are done, we take this off like we did before. And to me, this is the most important aspect of having each of those warp ends be separate, because I don't have to fuss around with weaving in those last few rows. What I can do is simply pull my warp threads, since they are loose here at the bottom, until the top is level. And it makes a really nice, smooth top edge. So the benefit is that I can finish the top edge in a really smooth, quick way. The drawback is that it takes a little more time to warp it because there's just more cutting and arranging. And the other drawback is that there's more ends to weave in. And I'll show you, once I get these pulled in, how we would do that. I also like with this technique that I can decide how big I want my mend to be. If I'm going along and like this one, there was still room for me to weave another couple of picks, but I decided not to. So I can say, I think that's good enough, and pull in the extra warp, just like this. Right? I'm nearly there. Okay. I'm happy with that. So I would take the rubber bands off, take the darning disc out. This is a woven fabric rather than the knitted fabric, but for this purpose it works just the same. All right, here's the back side of my work. And I can use my tapestry needle to pull all those working yarns to the back. These can all now be woven in the space between the back side of the fabric and the front patch. And one of my colors, probably pink in this case, I would use to just whip stitch the top down. And at this point, it's like a little pocket, which is also pretty cute. I really hope that you'll give one of these darning looms a try. They use such a small amount of yarn and such a small amount of time and add such a great spark of creativity to your garments and other things that need repair in your life. And it's just a fun way to spend a little bit of time. So I hope you'll give that to yourself, and happy darning.